Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is September 26, 2024. I guess this is S4A Livestream number 120. It's probably going to be a short one today. We're just getting back into live streaming. I had an insanely busy summer on the personal side, and I haven't streamed in like 3 months. Part of that was due to just other commitments and not really being able to settle down and do the streams like usual. We usually do them once a week, at least once every 3 weeks. So this was actually the longest break that I've taken in doing the streams since we started streaming 2.5 years ago, February 2022. The streams are, I think, invaluable. I really appreciate the people who turn up for them consistently. You know, and by that I don't just mean specific individuals, although there are specific individuals. Shout out to the mods who've been modding for a long time. But, people who drop in once in a while as well. But I just mean that consistently there is a community of people, some regulars, some drop-ins in the streams that help to make these things what they are. They have helped me to learn a lot. And, my job as a facilitator is to convey that to everybody on the Spotify and the YouTube and wherever you're listening to this, Substack, SoundCloud, and wherever else this may be uploaded in the future, Patreon. And we do upload things to Patreon. Everything is publicly available. So I just use the Patreon, which lets me upload. It's like, I don't know, however many hundreds of hours of video. I just use it as another redundancy. Everything is free. And then, if you want to support the channel, patreon.com/socialism for all. You might as well thank the patrons while we're talking about this. There we go. That's a current one, I think. Patreon.com/socialism for all, buymeacoffee.com/socialism for all. That support helps me to spend more time on this channel. It is a non-commercial channel. We don't run ads or sponsorships or anything. It's just viewer supported. And I would, make some kind of content, even if nobody supported, but I wouldn't be able to spend so much time on it. And definitely not, coming up on 5 years into this. We're more than 4.5 years into doing the S4A YouTube channel. We started a long, long time ago. Actually, about 5 years ago exactly, I started a Facebook page, Socialism for All, which was just meme sharing. It's kind of left Unity at that point. And then I started digging more into the Marxism, which was my inclination rather than anarchism. Turned out left Unity wasn't really a thing. And, the more you study Marxism, Marxism-Leninism, you see why that is. Anarchism and Marxism are basically incompatible. Marx and Engels commented on that many times in the past. Anarchism is not new now. It was around in Marx and Engels' day, and they, criticized it heavily, whether it was Bakunin, Kropotkin, Proudhon. Also, we'd say that because of its emphasis on individualism, it is a petty bourgeois rather than a proletarian ideology. Anyway, started out as left Unity. You can still see that even in some of the very earliest videos on the channel from 2020, where we were still using like hammer and sickle over black and red flag, and it just didn't work. So we went full Marxist-Leninist because that was where I was leaning in the first place, and that's what we've been doing. And unfortunately, these days, the term Marxism-Leninism has become so debased. There's so much revisionism that is communism tainted with capitalist ideas that is calling itself Marxist-Leninist, that something, really needs to be done about that. And it's almost like a given when you see somebody calling themselves a Marxist-Leninist now. They have some kind of garbage revisionist ideas in there. So hence a lot of people have become Marxist-Leninist Maoists as part of an anti-revisionist effort. I'm sympathetic to that. I think that personally for me, and we're going to cover this more in a future playlist on the Sino-Albanian split, but I think there's some issues with Maoism. I think that there's a lot of correct things. I think we would agree on a lot of the big questions. I think there's also some theoretical things that need refining, in my opinion. But yeah, anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism, Marxism-Leninism, Maoism. I get why people have gravitated in this direction because there's so much just absolutely anti-Marxist crap being touted as Marxist-Leninist. And, a lot of anti-Leninist stuff. You'll find left comms that'll say, well, Leninism isn't Marxist. Well, no, I don't agree with that. But, many Marxist-Leninists today don't really adhere to Leninist principles even, and that is pretty consistent. But anyway, as I said, we're coming up on 5 years of this channel. That's in February, and I hope by then, thank the patrons again, and we'll go back to the main screen. I hope that by that point, my plan anyway, and as you know, plans work out about 50% of the time here. The plan is to finish the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide, which is really what this channel started around. You know, basically, I found this syllabus way back in the day from Movimiento Anti-Imperialista, and it's like 24 texts on Marxism-Leninism. And I was like, I'll read this, you know, this will give me some education. And I wasn't really that involved in the communist community at all at that point. I mean, I had done union work and I had been involved in left politics, not specifically communist, because it's honestly just hard to find. I'd not come across a lot of communists in my life. Came across some Trotskyists who honestly turned me off to becoming a communist, period. But yeah, there's just not like a ton of communists out there until I got involved with this. And as capitalism goes further into crisis, you know, in the post-2008 environment, things got significantly more intense in terms of left agitation, education, and some organizing. You know, we're trying to contribute to that and help that to grow. And I think that there's a lot more people conversant in these topics now. But, you know, 5 years later and 900 videos later and, you know, something like 450 audiobooks later, we're finally going to finish those core like 24 texts. And the last two left are Capital Volume 1. We just finished Anti-During Part 2. Then it's Capital Volume 1, which is going to take several months to do, because you really got to go chapter by chapter, and sometimes even section by section, because some of the chapters are pretty long. And then Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And then there's sort of a closing essay from MAI. Well, it's actually not from MAI, but they link to it, on the reconstitution of the Communist Party and like why, you know, anti-revisionist efforts are needed. So yeah, we'll be concluding the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide finally. And, you know, how many hundreds of side readings have we done in the process? Want to thank all the people who send stuff in, because people often be like, oh, hey, I heard the audiobook that you did on this. This would be a really good follow-up to that. And I'll check it out. And sometimes I do it. I mean, usually I read it. Sometimes I do it on the channel. Sometimes I don't. But it, you know, has just helped with me knowing what the hell I'm doing. And we've gotten now, if you go onto the YouTube home tab and scroll down, we have the recommended reading lists there. There are quite a few of them. I've also started doing what I'm calling narrative playlists. So we did the Sino-Soviet split playlist last, like, December, November, I guess. That was really the first one. Well, actually, it was the second one, because we were going to start a Rosa Luxemburg playlist. Some of you may recall back in late summer, early fall last year, I was starting a Rosa Luxemburg thing, and then the Israel-Gaza situation started, and it seemed to me like the Luxemburg playlist was not the best choice at that point, and I switched to other things that seemed to be more pressing to me. And so the narrative playlists are basically playlists where the readings are sort of more pre-chosen ahead of time, and there's sort of a narrative thread through them. And so we've gone on to the anti-Browderism playlist, and there will be actually 2 anti-Trotsky playlists. I'll do an intro on this pretty soon, like probably next week, if I'm able to keep recording audiobooks next week. That's part of the other reason why I'm streaming, is it had been 3 months, and I really wanted to shift the balance back towards more audiobooks. You know, when I do a lot of streaming, it gets to be a lot of me, and I don't like that so much. So I wanted to just make it more about the audiobooks. And then after a while, it's like, okay, there's room for some me in there again. So we're back now. But anyway, where was I? Yeah, anti-Trotskyism. I recorded basically an intro for that, and then I have to do some texts. But the first playlist is Lenin against Trotsky. Far from Trotsky being like the best Bolshevik and Lenin's boy. Actually, Lenin and Trotsky were severely at odds for like 15 years prior to 1917, which is when Trotsky became a Bolshevik. Prior to that time, Trotsky was, it's often just said that he was a Menshevik. He was kind of trying to do his own thing, like neither Bolshevik nor Menshevik at times, but he wound up in practice helping the Mensheviks time and time again. And Lenin wrote a lot about that. So there's like 30 texts I want to do where Lenin is really taking Trotsky to task. That playlist is already up. I haven't posted the intro to it yet, but there's like 4 or 5 things on it where Lenin is excoriating Trotsky for one thing or another. And there are other texts where it gets even more in detail. So yeah, it's Trotskyists again will try to paint Trotsky as the best Bolshevik who ever was. It actually makes a lot of sense that he didn't rise to the top of the Bolsheviks after the revolution, being that he was really kind of a stranger in the party all that time, and everybody knew who Trotsky was. So, nobody really trusted him because of who he had been for such a long time. Now, he did make contributions, and, his leadership of the Red Army was significant and so on. But as far as a theoretical leader, he was not trusted, and for kind of good reason. So anyway, we'll get into more of that. And then there's also just a general anti-Trotskyism playlist, which it'll have a few of the Lenin readings, but also just other things, Stalin's and also Kamenev's Trotskyism or Leninism. Both of them did a piece like that. One was Leninism or Trotskyism, one was Trotskyism or Leninism. A lot of the same points summarizing, who Trotsky is, and as he was seeking more power in the early 20s, why he was being opposed, basically. So we'll do more about that. And, that kept going into the 30s. Things like Stalin's Mastering Bolshevism, which is on the channel, is in that list now. And we'll have other things as well. So there are narrative playlists. That's kind of the new thing that we're doing on the channel as we enter into the last couple of readings of the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide playlist. We'll also be doing more texts for the other recommended reading syllabi and, study guides and things like that aren't complete yet. We'll continue to upload those, but the core one for this channel was always the basic ML study guide from MAI. Anyway, that's about it. So as far as today, I want to chat with people because we haven't chatted in a long time. As far as other things, I wanted to do 2 COVID articles, and also the president of Sri Lanka is being described as a Marxist-Leninist. So we have some interviews with people from his party, and we can look at some of their industrial policies and things like that. There are also claims that he is kind of an ethno-nationalist and pro-Tamil genocide. So we'll look at an article about that. Basically 2 COVID articles, 3 on the new president of Sri Lanka, and we'll have some chat. So that's kind of the plan for today. I was hoping to start this about a half an hour earlier. Thanks, Twitch, for screwing that up. But yeah. All right, let's see what's going on in the chat right now. Catch up with that before we do COVID. And thanks to Britt for being here. Remember, don't argue with trolls. Don't feed the trolls. Tag a mod. Brit the Savage, Shakespeare, SHAKSPIER, or Health Revolt, and they will dispose of the problem. Because I read through the comments, and if there's like tons of bickering with the troll comments, it just slows down the whole process. Anarchism and Marxism are not compatible. It is obvious the individual of anarchism is the problem. Yeah, Stalin breaks that down. There's a long one that we have from Stalin on the channel about anarchism. It's like 2.5 hours long. But for me, the thing that stands out about that one is that anarchism seeks liberation for the individual on the basis of them being an individual. Marxism seeks liberation for the individual through the individual's membership in a class, because you can liberate a class. Liberating all individuals, not possible in class society. And that to me was like, in a nutshell, the essence of the problem. And having considered anarchist, anarcho-syndicalist, anarcho-communist ideas myself, I think it makes a lot of sense. There was a time in my life before I really started studying Marxism-Leninism where that had some appeal for me over, liberalism, let's say, or libertarianism. But there comes a point where you go, how do anarchists actually take power? How do they, liberate society and all that? And it was that kind of thinking that basically led me into the kinds of thought processes that you find in Marxist criticisms of anarchism. So I was like, okay, I think the Marxists are right on that. I recently came across a lot of PDFs of newspaper articles and pamphlets by William Z. Foster from his official archive on the Marxist Internet Archive that showcases his slanderous opportunist and Khrushchevite critique of Stalin, as well as his support for Is Not Real. Would you like for me to provide them to you? Would you do audiobooks of some of these as critical readings for the anti-Browderism playlist? Thank you. I've actually seen most of those myself. If you want to send me some of the worst offenders, yes, I'll definitely, if you pick out 2 or 3 highlights maybe. I've seen those, and I'm aware that Foster, was basically the lead official anti-Browderist, in air quotes. But official anti-Browderism was pretty weak, and to say the least. And there were a lot of criticisms of how the CPUSA was constituted or reconstituted post-Browder in that, and we kind of paused that playlist for now. We'll get back into it because we're not done with Phase 2, Marxism-Leninism versus Revisionism, collection of works by Foster and others, including people who had been singing Browder's praises just a few years prior, as we often mention in the narrative portion of those audiobooks. But yeah, the Phase 3 of that playlist is going to be more like third-party criticisms of that the CPUSA was reconstituted, but they're just doing Browderism without Browder, or Browderism light in the post-Browder years. Let me get a sip of water here. But anyway, yeah, I'm aware that Foster was kind of crap as time went on, and the Browder problem was, quote, fixed. But then they continued with a pretty, rightist course anyway, even without Browder. Maybe it wasn't quite as bad. They lost the support for the, quote, progressive monopoly capitalists, which is like so egregious, as people say. That's just liberalism. That's not even social democracy at that point. Yeah, if you want to send some of those, I'll take a look. Excited for a COVID update. I was infected back in August and it was pretty bad, and I had light symptoms relative to more extreme cases. Let's just jump into COVID for a minute. I want to make sure that we do cover the articles today. So let's start with this article from The Guardian. COVID on the rise, as experts say that England has capitulated to the virus. Immunologists push for increase in testing and more widespread vaccine booster rollout as a new variant, XEC, emerges. And so this is just from today, actually. And so this is about England, but this is not, exclusive to England. Similar kinds of things exist in the U.S. COVID is on the rise in England, and experts have warned that more must be done to prevent and control infections after a, quote, capitulation to the virus. Professor Danny Altman, an immunologist at Imperial College London, said that those working in the field were perplexed by the current attitude to the battle against COVID, as the latest figures showed an increase in hospital admissions. The latest data for England from the UK Health Security Agency showed that hospital admissions increased to 3.71 per 100,000 population for the week between 16 and 22 September 2024. So last week, compared with 2.56 per 100,000 the previous week. The percentage of people with symptoms who have tested positive for COVID based on tests at Sentinel Spotter Laboratories has also risen in the last week to 11.8% compared with 9.1% in the previous week. Altman described the prevailing stance on the virus as a capitulation. Quote, to those who work in this field, the current attitude of acceptance to losing this war of attrition against COVID is puzzling and a little bit desperate, he said. So that is the attitude overall. When was the last time you heard anybody in the U.S. government at any level really say anything about COVID? And for all of the, they were talking a couple of years ago, maybe even last year, about don't lump this in with the flu. That's exactly the approach that they take to the shots now, where you get a new COVID shot each year, and one per year, even though the mRNAs do not hold up for a whole year. They're really most effective for about 3 months, and then they really drop off. It's better than nothing, but one a year leaves you exposed for at least 6 months to 9 months out of the year. Really not an effective strategy. And so, really implicitly, then, the US is just trying to regulate everything based on infections, which is, yeah, that's capitulation. I mean, that's definitionally, you're just relying on, immunity from the infection if you survive it. What's the problem with that? Is that every time you get infected, there are serious problems. It's doing a lot of damage in your body, and sometimes more than other times. And there are different risk factors. But even if you're young, you can, increase your risk of diabetes or a lot of other problems. So let's look at one thing now. I'll keep this fairly short. There's more to that England article, but here's one example. And I think what I want to do on these streams is maybe just do one or two articles at the top of every stream rather than like a whole segment. Just to remind people, this is an ongoing thing. There's a point where I got sick of talking about this because the science is just showing the same things that we knew in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 over and over and over again. Increased risk of heart attack from infection, brain damage, immune damage, liver damage, all kinds of stuff. We know it. It just keeps getting confirmed. Honestly, it was adding to like my pandemic-related PTSD. That was another thing that they were talking about in the Guardian article was, people don't want to think about it because they have a lot of unpleasant associations with the pandemic. Yeah, but we can't just use the ostrich routine. We have to actually deal with this. That's called being responsible. So anyway, basically just confirming what we already knew. Here's an article, again, from today. COVID-19 causes lasting cognitive impairment tied to brain injury markers. A new study reveals that COVID-19 patients suffer from significant long-term cognitive deficits even a year after hospitalization, with brain injury markers and reduced brain volume. Yes, brain mass shrinkage. Your brain gets smaller, reduced brain volume, suggesting immune-mediated damage. What does that mean? So part of your immune system is inflammation that can be used appropriately sometimes against infectious things that get into your body. Inflammation is part of your healing response, but too much inflammation can do a lot of damage. And so that's one of the problems with COVID is you get massive amounts of inflammation, which damage healthy tissue. And so let's continue on with the article. In a recent study published in the journal Nature Medicine, researchers assessed one-year cognitive, biomarker, and neuroimaging outcomes in post-hospitalization coronavirus disease 2019, or COVID-19, patients and identified factors linked to cognitive deficits and recovery. So cognitive deficits are commonly reported in post-acute COVID-19 patients, so long COVID, but their recovery trajectory and underlying mechanisms remain unclear. The most affected individuals are those with neurological or psychiatric complications, neuro-COVID, though many studies have excluded these patients, just to focus on people that didn't have that, like more general COVID patients. Up to 1/3 of COVID-19 patients experience complications such as stroke, because it causes a lot of clotting issues, and encephalopathy. Few studies have combined comprehensive cognitive assessments with biological or neuroimaging data. So biomarkers is where they will study blood or other bodily fluids looking for particular, like the presence of particular compounds or chemicals that serve as a marker, and it's, biological, so a biomarker, indicating something, like it might be the spike protein or whatever. And follow-up data is scarce. COVID-19's impact on the brain is considered immune-mediated rather than neuroinvasive. So in other words, the virus negatively impacts your brain, it harms your brain using your own immune system against it rather than directly invading the brain. Although parts of the brain, like the brainstem, can be directly infected, but largely it messes up your immune system, and then your immune system in turn harms your brain. Though this study notes potential similarities between COVID's brain effects and those seen in other systemic infections. Further research is needed to better understand the mechanisms of post-acute COVID-19 cognitive deficits and identify effective strategies for treatment and prevention. So, this is something I struggled with after I got infected in December 2020, all through 2021. I mean, it's just my mind would go blank constantly, constantly. And I feel like that has improved significantly. But, it was a good chunk of my life where just my mind was not working as it had. And so, I've taken extreme measures. I still mask to avoid infection. But for people who are getting infected 2, 3 times a year, what is this doing to their intelligence, to their memory, to their executive function, to their ability to plan and think long term, to their ability to delay gratification? I mean, it's pretty scary. Do you know somebody who is not the same after getting COVID, either once or repeatedly? Well, it's probably from this. So, how did they do the study? Patients aged 16 and older were recruited over 19 months between March 2021 and October 2022 from 17 sites in the UK through the COVID Central Nervous System study, which was part of the National Institute of Health Research COVID-19 Bioresource. And informed consent was provided either by participants or their next of kin, I guess for post-mortem studies. The study included hospitalized COVID-19 patients without prior neurological diagnoses. So people who were healthy or at least weren't diagnosed with anything neurologically, your brain and nervous system related prior to getting COVID, with or without acute neurological or psychiatric complications. And so that they have two groups for that. The neuro-COVID group, who had acute neurological complications from the COVID, was identified through neurology referrals or clinician notification, and the without acute psychiatric complications group was matched by age, ethnicity, sex, COVID-19 severity, and admission epoch, so like which wave they got infected in. Some patients attended the emergency department but were not hospitalized. So some people went into the ER but didn't stay. So participants completed a cognitive assessment, the cognitron, between 1 to 26 months post-discharge. This included computer-based cognitive tasks across 5 domains, blood sampling for brain injury markers, and MRI scans. Subjective cognitive impairment was assessed through a binary question. Brain injury markers such as neurofilament light chain, ubiquitin carboxyl terminal hydrolase L1, tau protein, glial fibrillary acidic protein were measured in serum using specialized kits. So these are markers that if they show up in your serum, then like the presence of those indicates brain injury. There are certain kinds of proteins and things that your body produces like only when you're injured. And so if they're there, they know that there's been an injury, and in this case specifically a brain injury. Cognitive performance was compared to a normative community sample of about 3,000 individuals matched for demographic factors. Neuroimaging analysis involved gray matter, white matter, and cerebrospinal fluid volume measurements from MRI scans. Data were analyzed using standardized protocols, and multiple regression models were developed to assess the cognitive outcomes. So this is how they did the study. And so what did they find? They analyzed 351 COVID CNS participants alongside a control group of about 3,000 matched by age, sex, first language, and education. Participants had no prior neurological diagnoses and were assessed at a median of 384 days post-COVID-19, so about a year later, year and a month, 13 months, with evaluations including cognitive testing, self-reported measures, neuroimaging, and serum sampling. So objective and subjective measurements. The cohort had a median age of 54 years with 58% male, 78% white ethnicity. Among them, 29% experienced severe COVID symptoms. At the time of post-acute assessment, 84% had received 2 vaccine doses, while 54% had neurological or psychiatric complications. That was the neuro-COVID group, and 46% did not. So it was roughly half and half. Based on their demographics, cognitive testing revealed that both groups performed significantly worse than expected. The deficits were global, spanning multiple cognitive domains, with those affected by encephalopathy showing the greatest deficits, followed by cerebrovascular and inflammatory complications. Okay, so encephalopathy is brain disease. Cerebrovascular has to do specifically with blood flow and to the brain, and then inflammation. Okay, Memory concerns were significantly associated with greater objective deficits in both groups, with a notable increase in memory concerns post-COVID. Both subjective concerns and objective impairments in memory were strongly concordant. So when they say memory concerns, subjective memory concerns, that's the person saying, I am concerned about my memory. Subjectively, to me, it seems like my memory is not as good. And then also objective impairments, like you can measure performance with memory assessment tests and then compare that to the baseline of, similar demographics. So this supported the reliability of self-reported symptoms. In other words, the people who were concerned about their memory, it was concordant with the objective tests that they were doing worse. So that was their self-reported concerns were actually reliable. It wasn't like they were concerned, but they're actually doing fine. The people who were concerned also tended to do much worse. So cognitive impairment was found to be generalized across all domains without evidence of domain-specific deficits. Let's say that again. Cognitive impairment from the COVID was found to be generalized across all domains. Everything that they were measuring for in terms of cognitive performance, it was across the board without evidence of domain-specific deficits. Recovery of cognitive performance showed some improvement early after discharge, but the recovery plateaued during the follow-up with no significant further recovery observed between later assessments, indicating persistent cognitive deficits. So in other words, it got a little bit better after they were discharged, but then the recovery plateaued at a reduced level compared to how it was before. Clinical factors and neuroimaging. The study also examined clinical factors associated with cognitive impairment, symptoms of depression, multimorbidity or multiple illnesses, and brain injury markers, such as those chemicals we mentioned before, were associated with cognitive deficits. So if your blood test showed you had elevated amounts of those markers, then that was associated with worse cognitive performance. And there were higher levels of these markers found in the patients who had significant neurological problems compared to the group that didn't. Notably, multimorbidity and depression played significant roles in predicting cognitive outcomes, with mental health status influencing both groups. So multimorbidity, meaning having multiple things wrong, and depression was able to predict the cognitive outcomes. So if you had those, you were likely to do worse with the cognitive outcomes. Additionally, structural brain changes were identified through neuroimaging with reduced anterior cingulate cortex volume. So we're talking about reduced brain volume. Your brain shrinks from COVID. And just to put this up on the screen, because like I said, we've known this for a really long time. Here's an article from April 2022. This was published in National Geographic off of a scientific article. Even mild COVID-19 can cause your brain to shrink. We've known this for 2.5 years. So for me, I look at that and I go, yeah, okay, I'm going to avoid infection. I don't know, what it's going to take for people if that's not swaying them. Like, my brain, it's almost too big. I don't mind if I lose 10% of my brain or age it 10 years. Yeah, that's fine. I got plenty to spare. Yeah, no, you don't. You don't. Most people could use, more brain, not less. But for real, like, don't damage your brain. You really need that. And like I said, most people, struggle a little bit, my perspective. Anyway, let's not go reducing intelligence with brain damage, avoidable brain damage, if you just wear a fucking mask. Wear an N95, then nobody catches what you have, and you don't catch what they have. Trust the mask. Those masks, they're called N95 because they reduce at least 95% of particulate matter down to the viral level. It can filter out things that small, and that's great. You want to do that. Actual testing, we did a University of Maryland study in a previous video that showed that 98%, even when people were shouting, wearing a mask, they were shouting at the top of their lungs, the mask was filtering out 98% of the viral material that they otherwise would have been expelling into the air. So just wear a fucking mask. The kind of just absolute, how politicized it's become and how people allow themselves to get wrapped up in the peer pressure of, not taking adequate medical measures during a pandemic. just absolutely sickens me. I don't know. I don't know what to say. It's like, is there hope for the species that you think that like owning the libs or, pretending everything's normal and going to brunch, whatever, is more important than stopping the spread of a disease that's impairing immune function and causing brain damage? I, to me, that's like stop the world. I want to get off. Like, is there another planet I can go live on? That's roughly like how I feel looking at a situation like that. Anyway, going back to this, so that reduced brain volume found in this study was linked to impairments in cognition, memory, and attention, things a lot of people are already struggling with, and it suggests that the cognitive deficits may be related to disruptions in the brain's attentional and emotional processing networks. Great, because again, it's not like, there's a mass shooting, like what is it, 2 a day or something on average in the United States right now? I mean, which is partly political. But I don't think people need any more of a problem processing their emotions. Anyway, the multifaceted models for both neuro-COVID and COVID groups revealed that age, multimorbidity, and brain structure abnormalities were significant predictors of cognitive outcomes. The study highlights the need for further research to better understand the cognitive impact of COVID-19 and guide therapeutic strategies. You know what? Therapeutic strategies, totally appropriate for people who got affected in the first year, before we really knew anything. We know now, wear a mask, get vaccinated as a plan B in case you have a mask failure, but wear a mask, you won't get infected. And then you don't need the fucking therapy. But when you're relying on this, quote, COVID is over, as COVID is actually going up to unprecedented levels of spread, yeah, you're going to need therapy for this entirely preventable thing that you just got swept up in the peer pressure to, not mask or whatever. Anyway, so the conclusions, so this prospective national study of 351 hospitalized COVID-19 patients, and we will say that if you're hospitalized with COVID, your odds of long COVID and all these complications go way, way up. If you're not hospitalized, your odds of this are lower, but there's, I wasn't hospitalized, and I had pretty significant impacts for like a year or two. Actually, cognitive impacts for like a year. I definitely felt better after that. My immune system was impacted. I was having immune-related problems really for like 2.5 years. Might still be having them, but it was definitely for 2.5 years afterwards. Because it affects your T cells, it attacks and kills T cells. Only other virus that does that is HIV. It's not exactly the same as HIV, but it does attack your immune system in a similar way. We'll have another article on that the next time that we get into this. But anyway, there's the journal reference at the bottom. I could keep reading this, but it's like, how much more do you need to hear? Either you care that, there is widespread brain damage going on and you're contributing to its spread by not masking, not doing air filtration, not doing all the other things that are easy and cost effective to do because you want to be normal. You want to live in, I don't live in fear. Well, I think you actually do live in fear because you're succumbing to peer pressure to not take simple, cost-effective measures. Masks are cheap. You can order 20 packs for like cheap online. Get N95s. It's so simple, but people won't do it. And I know where I live, it's maybe 1 in 200 people mask. I get occasional, scowling from people for masking. You know what? I'm not really interested in the opinion, truly, of people who are going to think badly of masking at this point in time. I don't care. I don't care what you have to say. If you're that ignorant, if you're that politicized, if you're that warped, I really don't care what you have to say. So, scowl on, glare on. I don't give a shit. You're making my life easier by just filtering out people I don't need to listen to. But there you go. I don't know how much more people need to hear on this, but we'll keep it to that for now today. And that's that. This has been your COVID update for today. For COVID news, Data Report on YouTube does good work daily. Yeah, I actually linked to Data Report off of the YouTube. YouTube changed their format, 6 months ago. And so it's harder to see there used to be like a dedicated tab for channels that you link to. I don't know why YouTube doesn't want people to be recommended more channels by channels that they like. But yeah, I do link to Data Report. I think Data Report does good work. He has mentioned he's not like a professional statistician. He's a guy who, he's a food delivery driver who just happens to be really interested in stats and reporting. I think that that's great that he's doing that because he's doing a better job than most people. I think there are times where he covers stuff that is not that statistically significant, which maybe like a lack of training contributes to like not maybe being aware of some of that. But again, overall, I think at this point he's doing better reporting than most people are, and I appreciate Data Report. Like I said, I hit a point where I just mask now, period. I don't think about it because thinking about it was just getting me down to a level where it was like getting kind of hard. And so now I just trust the mask and I don't think about it. And but yeah, every once in a while, like throw on a Data Report video. What do you think is this a source of this capitulation on COVID? Isn't it obvious? Like, what would you say it is? I would say it's the back to normal urgency that people stopped going out to eat for 2 weeks back in 2020 and almost collapsed the global economy. So I mean, like, even in the UK, there was a thing called the Eat Out to Help Out campaign. When they did reopening in the summer of 2020, they were like paying people to go to restaurants. That's crazy, but it's all about profit. That's what it's all about. It's about profit, period. It literally is that simple. Dementia from COVID, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's links between COVID and like worsening of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. There's, I think we've done stuff on that in the past. The potential comorbidities of COVID-led microplastics really scare me. Yeah, I mean, so COVID is an infectious agent, and then lead and microplastics are environmental hazards. But yeah, all of them can result in impaired. Well, I mean, like supposedly there's no health harm from microplastics, but there's other research that indicates like endocrine disruption. So that's your hormones, and who knows what else. Lead, of course, is neurologically toxic. And even there's like ways that you can get lead out of your body and excrete lead that you've ingested in the past. But the damage isn't undone. So, lead does really significant neurological damage. I checked in on an old language learning YouTuber I used to watch during the pandemic to find out COVID. I just called it COVID. There we go. I checked in on an old language learning YouTuber I used to watch during the pandemic to find out that COVID has made him severely disabled since I last watched him. Scary stuff. Yeah, I mean, over 1 million people dead, tens of millions disabled. Nobody's talking about it. COVID made my partner's POTS worse. Yep. I don't even see doctors wearing masks anymore, even when I went to the hospital. Absolutely. It's all part of the back to normal push. And actually, doctors and nurses were among those resisting the masking. So this, for me, medicine, public health, anything like that, I don't believe anymore. These people, there was a major global test of like, which side are you on? Where do you stand? And a lot of people whose, professed function in society is to promote health and public health, medical research, and biological research, just shat the bed, and they, they went behind bourgeois respectability, and they are afraid to speak out. And if there ever was a zombie apocalypse, like for real, you know how it would go. I mean, it's bad. Some people don't value their intelligence. Yeah, it's like, yeah, what's a little brain damage? Thing is, it's not even a little brain damage. It's a lot of brain damage. Yeah, they also don't value the safety of others necessarily. My partner has people at work come in with COVID and no mask to their job all the time. They don't even get sent home. Well, again, though, this is like the public health agencies like the CDC and the state. There's a state level CDC type agency in every state. It's dead silent across the board. When Biden did Vax and Relax in May 2021, a lot of people were shocked because it was not supported by the evidence. And yet they all rolled over within a month. Within a month, it was like, You think you can reform this Democratic Party? Anybody who thinks that out there, you really can't. You really can't. They're just in complete lockstep with what big money wants. I find this kind of ridiculous. I'm sure by that time everyone would have gone through COVID and developed some kind of resistance. The thing is, the resistance that people develop to COVID is incomplete and temporary. And you develop a lot of damage in your body usually during the infection that gives you that incomplete and temporary resistance. And then you just get it again. The other thing is that the virus keeps mutating. So when you hear that there's a new strain that is vaccine resistant means that it has evolved to evade your immune defenses. So, that's what that means. So the only thing you can do is stop it from spreading. Cut it off, stop, because viruses, unlike bacteria and fungi, they, if you take a colony of bacteria and you just give it some food in a petri dish, it will eat the food and grow. Same thing with like a fungus. Viruses require other cells to replicate. You can't just feed a virus and it'll like reproduce on its own. Viruses do not reproduce on their own. They need other cells. They need to hijack living cells to replicate. In that sense, viruses are kind of technically not alive. Viruses can either be like viable or non-viable in terms of whether they are functionally intact enough to infect you. So they can be quote unquote alive in that sense, but they're not really alive in the sense that they don't just reproduce on their own. So what you do is you stop it from spreading. You wear a mask, and then when somebody gets it, it'll reproduce in their body, but it can't jump hosts, because you're masking. And also build a Corsi Rosenthal box. They cost less than $100. They're really effective air filters. CORSI-ROSENTHAL, Corsi Rosenthal. You can find instructions on YouTube. You can get the parts at, Lowe's or any hardware store. It's just 4 furnace filters, a cardboard box, and a box fan, and some duct tape. That's all it is. You put a fan on top, 4 furnace filters on the side, MERV 13 filtration rating or better. Put cardboard on the bottom, duct tape the whole thing up, and then on the 4 corners of the box fan that's on top blowing up, you put a little piece of cardboard just to block the corners so that the air can't fall back in. That's it. It takes 45 minutes to put them together. I've made a few of them by now. They cost about $90. And yeah, Corsi Rosenthal box, very effective air filter that is effective against viruses, including COVID. Not to mention dust and, I saw somebody saying like their Corsi Rosenthal box filters go from like white to, gray purple. What the hell have I been breathing in here all this time in like, a few months? But it's true. I'm looking, actually, if you hear the noise in the background, there's like a soft kind of, hissing or fan noise. That's a Corsi Rosenthal box. I have playing in the background. I have running in the background. I'm playing an air filter. I have it running in the background, and it gives a little white noise to like just cover up incidentals going on in the room, but also keeps my air nice and clean. Whether you have allergies and dust and whatever. I'm in a place that's not too bad for that right now, but it does, take care of whatever, your walls break down, fabrics and other things break down in the room, and it creates dust, and then you wind up breathing it. This sucks all of that up, and also any viruses or bacteria, and it's great. And and then every once in a while you can either vacuum out the filters or just like take it apart and add new filters to the box fan. But yeah, you don't develop permanent resistance to SARS coronavirus 2. That's the problem. In Europe, you also get bad looks when masking. Yeah, it's not as politicized as in the US, but yeah, because it disturbs people's sense of like normal. People get uncomfortable because they're like, wait, should I be masking? And so they get threatened by it. It's when you mask, it doesn't hurt anybody else. You're actually protecting everybody around you. It's actually good for everyone. But they get mad because they're like, it reflects poorly on them. And they know that. And so rather than, doing the responsible thing and just putting on a mask themselves, oftentimes they will lash out instead because you're inconveniencing them by reflecting back their irresponsibility during a pandemic. Yeah, we do what we can on sound quality for sure. Actually, all the old audiobooks, that was before the first few years, I didn't really do any noise reduction on them. And I kind of want to go back over some of the audiobooks and do noise reduction and like State and Revolution, things like that have the most views. I might upload like a noise reduced version of those at some point. Now that I have a better technical setup. I mean, my technical setup was okay at the time. It was always funny. I got a few comments in the first few years where people were like, "Oh, your mic is bad. I can hear the feedback." They mean the ground hum. But clearly audio geniuses, referring to ground hum as feedback. That's not what that is. I don't buy the microplastics aren't bad for you, but even if that were true, which it probably isn't. You can't ingest a credit card worth of plastic a week and like be okay. No. Even if it were true that the microplastics themselves were bioneutral, they're chemically bonded to forever chemicals. So like there's other definitely harmful forever chemicals, and they get bonded to microplastics like BPAs, phthalates, and PFASs. They're added for durability and non-stick properties. These bioaccumulate, so they build up in your body. And once plastics find their way into organ tissues, they don't get out. Arteries are being clogged by microplastic debris, and nanoplastic accumulates in the brain. Yeah, so that's also like, they're finding that in wild animals too, like fish. I want to say, let me see if I can find this actually, because it was like, they did a study on fish, and it was like 10% of marine life's brains were plastic. Let me see if I can find this. All right, percent of marine life brain plastic. Like, we're all gonna die, honestly. Microplastic can penetrate fish's brains, altering behavior. So that's one from 2017. This is from the newhumanitarian.org. Report: microplastic can penetrate fish's brains, altering behavior. October 9, 2017. And there's another study: are microplastics contributing to pollution-induced neurotoxicity? Brain damage in fish affected by plastic nanoparticles. A new study investigates the impact of microplastics in the brain. But it was like, while I'm bringing this up, there was a study I saw, it was like a significant percentage of like wild animal life body was plastic. Plastic is polluting everything, and it's getting into organisms. So August 4, 2023, a new study investigates the impact of microplastics in the brain. So researcher Jamie Ross, Jaime-Ross, set out to investigate the impact of microplastics on human health as we age. She wasn't expecting what she found. In a new study, she, an assistant professor of biomedical and pharmaceutical sciences at the Ryan Institute for Neuroscience, looked into effects of short-term exposure to microplastics in young and old mice. Her lab not only found that the particles induced cognitive changes, but they were also able to cross the highly protective blood-brain barrier. Quote, "We were very surprised to see that. The brain-blood barrier is supposed to be very difficult to permeate. It's a protective mechanism against viruses and bacteria, yet these microplastic particles were able to get there." And they found the plastics deep in the brain tissue. So here's the thing. The blood-brain barrier evolved, as we evolved and other mammalian life evolved in a plastics-free environment, because plastics are basically a byproduct of petroleum processing, and so they don't really occur naturally. So mammals did not evolve with defenses against microplastic because it wasn't part of the environment, that life was being selected for. So yeah, the study is called Acute Exposure to Microplastics Induced Changes in Behavior and Inflammation in Young and Old Mice, published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, 2023, if you want to look at that. But yeah, I mean, it's like things are just developing a certain percentage of plastic in their body. And that's, when I say we're all going to die, capitalism is polluting the world at a rate that we can't possibly evolve to, it's just too toxic. We can't possibly evolve to cope with. And at this rate, it's gonna the pollution is gonna pile up a lot faster than we can produce generations of organisms to, mutate around it, basically. It's funny because gym bros are on the cutting edge of the microplastic pollution, because plastics are considered a xenoestrogen, which obviously all humans, men included, have endogenously produced estrogen, which is healthy and great, but yeah, a lot of people care about this issue. So, in other words, because they're afraid of becoming feminine, they're like on the microplastics issue. Yeah, it's not going to cut it. Do you think people could get dumber because of microplastics? I mean, yeah. So, like the mouse study that I was just reading from, it noticed changes in behavior. So, yeah, could be neurotoxic and affect intelligence. All right, we are caught up with the chat. So let's go into Sri Lanka. Not actually, I mean, let's just talk about it. So Sri Lanka had an election, and the NPP, which is led by the JVP, and this is like a Marxist-Leninist group, allegedly, is now in power in Sri Lanka after a neoliberal government basically ushered in a big financial crisis. People went far left and they won. But, considering how debased the term Marxism-Leninism is these days, what is this party, what is this coalition all about? Basically, it's the NPP coalition, which is then led in turn by the JVP. So, okay, you got communists in the head of this coalition. That's something that we would theoretically want. Are they good communists? Because there's plenty of communists that say that they're communists and then actually suck. So, we have 3 articles here, and I would like to hear from anybody in the chat that has informed views on this topic. So what we're looking at here is an article from the Daily Mirror online, and that is a Sri Lankan website. It's .lk. JVP-led NPP believes in a unique Sri Lankan economic model based on socialist principles. That's a quote from Nalinda Jayatissa, former MP. And so let's get into this, and I hope that I made the text big enough, because it's going to be hard for me to lean in on the screen, but let me see what I can do. So these are the bullet points. We will operate an economy based on 3 pillars: production growth, economic expansion, and public participation. 2, we believe in a uniquely Sri Lankan economic model based on socialist principles, so socialism with Sri Lankan characteristics. It is important to bear in mind that Sri Lanka cannot develop while disregarding its ties with India, its closest neighbor, and the regional powerhouse. So that is one of the dominant features of Sri Lankan politics is their relationship with India, India being a possible imperializing influence on them, being that it is a larger economic force. The real crisis, because they are facing economic crisis, is more serious than the one being painted by the government through the media, which is loyal to it. And so also, according to the party, they don't believe in the total state role in business operations, like the management of estates, mines, and etc. So not even talking about collectivizing the commanding heights of the economy. We'll talk about what they do, because we're going to read this, which is an interview, and then another thing on their industrial policy, and then a third article about the relationship with the Tamil situation, the Tamil genocide. So the National People's Power, the NPP, which is the overall coalition, believes in economic policy formulation by the government for the expansion of GDP. So this is like, again, the Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics model. It's like all about GDP. It's like historically not really a socialist measure of the economy. We will act with the participation of the state-private sector partnership, private sector alone, and cooperatives, and as when necessary. We have to adopt the best possible approach. Kind of makes you like yearn for Titoism, even that would be Sounds like a step up over what they're proposing, but let's get into it, this unique model. So the JVP-led National People's Power former MP Dr. Nalinda Jayatissa takes questions from the Daily Mirror over its policy approaches in view of future elections. The NPP is now campaigning in anticipation of future elections. So here are excerpts from that interview, and this is overall from December 2023, so less than a year ago. Question: what is your party's stand on the current debt crisis and the extended fund facility with the International Monetary Fund? So again, this is when the last government, the neoliberal government, was in power. As everyone else does, we also see this as a rigorous economic crisis. The real crisis is more serious than the one being painted by the government through the media loyal to it. Sharmini Khoury, former director, Institute of Capacity Development of the IMF, explained in clear-cut terms the depth of the economic crisis before the central bank officials recently. According to her, even if we implemented the IMF prescription in its entirety with debt restructuring and maintaining a primary surplus of 2.5% of the GDP, our debt burden will reduce only to 95% of GDP by 2023. Normally, in an emerging economy, it is only 65% of GDP. So when you have a really high debt burden, it can affect growth because it's a drag on the overall economy. In India, it is 55%. As such, we, on the instruction of international organizations supportive of us, believe in the expansion of the size of our GDP, that is, to increase production. Up until 1975, for 30 years in the post-World War II period, a state-controlled economic model was experimented in the world. It was the same in countries such as Soviet Russia and the United States of America. Okay, who I guess have the same type of economy. They make several statements like that, and I find that so bizarre, and I don't even know where they're coming from. But afterwards, the neoliberal economic model, after like 1975, emerged, reducing the role of the state in the economy and allowing the private sector to take over. As with Sri Lanka, this model has not yielded, as President Ranil, I cannot pronounce that, himself admitted in his budget speech. The National People's Power believes in economic policy formulation by the government. For the expansion of GDP, we will act with the participation of the state-private sector partnerships, the private sector alone, and cooperatives as and when necessary. We have to adopt the best possible approach. We don't believe in a total state role in business operations like managing estates, mines, etc. We are ready to handle the economy with any sector that is competent. Still, the state does planning and supervision and will ensure that the people benefit in the end. Does this sound like Marxism-Leninism? It doesn't to me. Also, like basically saying that the USSR and the US had like the same type of economy from 1945 to 1975, I think is a bit of a stretch to say the least. But here we go. And I'm really looking forward to having the chat here because I think there's a lot of interesting, you see Marxist-Leninist elected. First of all, there is no parliamentary road to socialism, but can they do something in the government? Maybe. But it sounds like they're just sort of trying to shake off the debt while doing, allowing capitalism and doing, like they're not neoliberal. It's not just like the government has absolutely no regulatory power, but that's not really, it's not socialism for one thing at all. But, they're not neoliberal, and they have the aim of getting out of the debt crisis, and they will work with the private sector and whatever, and they're not looking to nationalize mines or other, quote, commanding heights of the economy, which by Marxist-Leninist principles is like the first thing that you would do. All right, so we got this so far. Is that a social market economic model in which the state plays a role similar to that of a referee in a football match? Answer: the economic model adopted by Soviet Russia and East European countries in post-World War II was called socialist or social market economy. To counter it, the capitalist camp introduced a social market economy. No, they really didn't. These are broad strokes here, but I think that really, really, really necessary details are being lost to where this is misinformation. The market is relevant to any economy. There is a Chinese saying, Every economy has a market, and every market has an economy. Rather than nomenclature, what is more important is the concept here. We will operate an economy based on three pillars: production growth, economic expansion, and public participation. It is themed a wealthy country with wealthy people. Liberal capitalism can create wealthy countries, but not wealthy people. I don't know what the fuck this person is talking about at all. I'm switching the chat for a second. What is this guy talking about? A wealthy country with wealthy people is giving me, like, in socialism, everyone is a billionaire vibes. The fakest Marxist-Leninist elected. JVP fought the Tamil Tigers. Yeah, we'll get into that in detail in the third article. It looks like he's not going to be in power for long if he's a Marxist-Leninist. Well, that's kind of what we're saying, is he doesn't sound like a Marxist-Leninist. You know, it's funny when there are people out there that easily say they're communists, but in reality they're not. Yeah, what? There's so many. When they're opportunists, revisionists, and they support the bourgeoisie one way or another. So, yeah, the market socialism, but, like, also the USA, according to this person, was a social market economy. What? What's an example of a good socialist leader in 2024? I mean, the socialist camp collapsed several decades ago. The task at this point is to clear the way to rebuild it. I'm pretty sure that the first thing that they did as president was to appoint Sampath Toyakanta to Secretary of Defense. In the past, they were responsible for participating in the 2009 genocide. Yeah, I think that we'll get into the specifics of that in the third article. I think it's only correct to let capital develop your country when you're a third world country. Why? I mean, support that statement. And especially if you're a Marxist-Leninist. Why? Explain that. Is this a BRICS thing? I'm not really sure what their relationship with BRICS is, except that he's touting the Chinese already. Yeah, it does sound like that they're classifying the New Deal as socialist reforms, but any Marxist-Leninist should know better than that. Seems to me like just some socialist fluff to cover up more liberalism for Sri Lanka. That's what it sounds like to me, too. Production growth and economic expansion, while some people read Marx and understand something else. Yeah, all right, let's keep going. So next question, what are the specific roles of government in each sector, such as agriculture and education? Answer, policy formulation is number one. Secondly, the government has to intervene in varying degrees in each sector to ensure benefits to people and make sure that they are protected from vulnerabilities. In the energy sector, we believe that the government has to have the majority stake. The majority stake, like not, they're still allowing others in there, but just the government has like the majority stake. It does not mean that the government is responsible for importing, distributing, and pumping fuel. So that can still be done by the private sector. Yet the government should have the authority to regulate the energy sector, because otherwise one big businessman, company, or another country can politically influence our country. The government should also have a stake in the regulation of the financial market. So this just sounds like social democracy, basically. Anyway, next question. As for education, your party has been opposed to private universities. Today, the number of students seeking education in the private sector has increased. A lot of students go abroad for studies. What is your policy on private investments in the education sector? Answer. Some elements try to project the NPP as a socialist party. Yeah. Hell-bent on having only the state sector education system. Existence of a fee-levying education system is not the yardstick it used to be in the definition of an economic model. For example, people are charged for education in China. Yep. During the time of ex-Chinese President Hu Jintao, private education was started. In Vietnam, people are charged for education in some cases. Still, these countries are ruled by communist governments. In Finland, education is free up to the basic degree level. Education is free to some extent in France. In our plan, we lay emphasis on human resources development. Education is key. According to the UNDP report on multidimensional vulnerabilities, 65% of people are in the risk group. It is bound to increase to 80%. The World Bank says 90% of people have exhausted their deposits or curtailed expenses for education and all. The World Food Program says 1/3 of people suffer from nutrient deficiencies. In such a context, the government should have the dominant role in the education sector, that is to iron out disparities. So, okay, reducing inequality is, far short of what we would understand as Marxism-Leninism, but it's better than increasing it. But yeah, it's a little confusing here. Still, the NPP does not stand in the way of people seeking private education over reasons such as lack of opportunities in the state universities, despite having qualifications, the absence of desired courses at the state universities, or being unwilling to study in the state sector. We won't allow businessmen to exploit people in the education sector by putting up private universities or schools. The government is responsible for education in whatever manner. I don't really understand that. So, by putting up private universities or schools, but you just said that it's not all going to be state. So if it's not all state and you're not allowing private, what is it? There are around 15 private universities already in operation. Nothing will happen to them. Okay, so you're not allowing the construction of new ones? It's unclear. We as the government will only regulate them. Also, we will expand education opportunities for people using tax revenue and private investments. We won't eliminate the private sector from this field at all. So 3 questions here. The first one, the JVP has transformed a lot of its policies in this regard, hasn't it? Answer. Anyway, it is natural for a socialist party to undergo changes in its strategies under evolving circumstances without compromising on the core principles. And that's what you hear from opportunists all the time, is like diversity of tactics, changing circumstances. Yes, but there are certain things which are non-negotiable. Anyway, nowhere in the world can one find specific models that outline how a socialist party runs a government. I'm not sure about that. It all depends on the level of development, public cognition, and global circumstances of any given country. To an extent, of course, but there's been a lot of different models over time now, and also a lot is understood about what the different outcomes of following different paths are with regard to those things. Question, can you describe your economic model using any particular terminology? Answer, neoliberalism is a failure as accepted even by the outgoing president who advocated it. The socialist camp collapsed in the world. Would you care to comment on that? There are socialist governments in the world. Other than China and Vietnam, other countries are not on a sound footing. We believe in a uniquely Sri Lankan economic model based on socialist principles. That is to enhance production and ensure its equitable distribution. Next question. What is the country which is closest to you in terms of economic policy? Answer. I don't think such a model can be found anywhere in the world. In our policy, there are numerous features similar to the Indian economic model, such as the development of small and medium industries, boosting GDP through cooperative societies, taxation aimed at protecting local industries. Like in Vietnam, we have export-oriented policies targeting the markets in the United States and Europe. We have features similar to the Singaporean model in terms of development of the service sector. If you insist on asking the closest country to our policy, we can cite Vietnam, which also underwent a similar phase in its history. So Vietnam used to do things differently. They got forced into opening up to the West after the USSR was not there to support them anymore. And, not all of that was by choice. So interesting. Question, what is your plan to attract foreign direct investments? So foreign direct investments inflowing into your country is other countries exporting capital into your country, imperializing your country. For that, not only foreign policy, but also economic and political policies are important. We need to follow a non-aligned foreign policy. It is a multipolar world. The global cloud of the United States and its currency is diminishing. Then BRICS as an organization has evolved. They engage in a new economic journey, building financial institutions which run counter to the IMF. At the latest BRICS summit, they wanted to expand it further, although there's like zero agreement on how to do that. There is, which we covered last year. There is a conversation on a power block in the global south, mightier than the G7. The African Union is developing. They talk about a common currency. We need a non-aligned policy to deal with it all. However, it is important to bear in mind that Sri Lanka cannot develop disregarding its ties with India, its closest neighbor and the regional powerhouse, and also part of BRICS. It's the I in BRICS. India is a country that can influence Sri Lanka in numerous ways. We will go for cordial relations, cordial imperialism. China is a key economic powerhouse in the world. It is located far from us, but we can get numerous economic benefits from it. We need to strike the right balance in ties with these countries. We have failed to attract investment despite opening up the economy, setting up special economic zones, and giving incentives. The reason is corruption. Nobody can run a factory due to the current high electricity and fuel prices. We can improve the ease of doing business index by rooting out corruption, starting from the political level. So this is an anti-corruption campaign that just wants it to attract foreign investment, make it easier to do business so that foreign capitalists can send in capital with greater confidence that it will actually go, into return on investment and building up the productive things that they're hoping for. So question, your party's Politburo member, KD Lalkantha, said that the party is even ready for an armed struggle if the need arises. Do you still believe in your party's violent past? Answer, in the latest opinion poll, JVP leader Anura Kumara Dissanakaye is leading among all the prospective presidential candidates, and he is the guy who won. Then there is no need for us to take up arms once again. So they're just going to do the peaceful parliamentary road. That'll be fine. Are we mad or crazy to do it? We believe in capturing power through electoral politics. We need public support and international backing. If we win democratically, we can get support from both ends. So I want to know what international backing. So this is saying that, for example, Allende would have in the 70s been able to hang on to power having taken the peaceful parliamentary road with sufficient international backing. Because he had public support, though not Marxist-Leninist organizing, which was sufficient to fight off the fascist takeover. Question, then are you denying what he said about being ready for an armed struggle? Answer, in his remarks, there is scope for one to interpret it in that way. He said he was involved in the armed struggle in 1988 and 89. He said he will not shy away from such action if the need arises in the future. This is interpreted in this manner. We completely rule out an armed struggle. So, last three questions. In your opinion, is the 1988-89 struggle a past aberration? Answer, whether an armed uprising is good or bad depends on its end result. In China, the government was formed in 1949 through an armed struggle. The armed struggles resulted in power capture in Vietnam and the United States. If the struggle is won, it is hailed. If it is defeated, it is bashed. What is your view in retrospect of what you did? Answer, we regret what happened at the time. We are shocked over what happened. We wish it did not happen. We wish our party was not banned. Whatever it is, we are shocked over what happened. When we mobilize ex-military personnel politically, the government slanders us, citing it as a move to launch another struggle. Question, did you reprimand Mr. Lalkantha over such remarks? Answer, we discussed the matter internally. We resolved that we should not make any statement that leaves scope for any such interpretation hereafter. So let's, before we go to the second article, let's go to the chat. New Deal socialist reform or capitalist bribes for the working class so they don't revolt. What are we reading? The Harris campaign? Interesting. Sounds like the China strategy, capitalism with Marxist dressing. On the majority stake in the energy sector. Why? It sounds like pure corruption. Major necessity, giant pot. Why allow other private profiteering? It doesn't make sense. Public education in China made China largely literate. I wonder what private Chinese schools will do to the nation's literacy rates. Quote, businessmen. Yeah, it's a nice way of saying it. So they're saying that they will allow for private education to make up for the shortcomings of state education. That sounds like not having a plan. I couldn't agree more. It sounds like a cover-up of the actual thing that they're going to do. Yep. Multipolar, BRICS, it ain't Marxist. Capitalism might just jump ship to the third world. It is a global system. They can do that. Sure, revolution through election, right? Eye rolling. So, yeah, I mean, that is literally why BRICS was set up in the first place. It was coined by Jim O'Neill at Goldman Sachs a little over 20 years ago in a paper called Building Better Economic BRICS. And it was about emerging markets for investment. That's where BRICS came from. Those countries don't really have much in common except that they are emerging markets. And this has since been seized by Dungus Three Worlds opportunists. But yeah, it was coined by Goldman Sachs. Armed struggle can be just even if they ultimately fail, so results aren't everything. Yeah, I mean, I think he was just making the point that, like, the victors write the history. So armed struggle has resulted in the formation of a lot of legitimate, considered legitimate political states. But when they fail, it's just like demonized because it was, quote, violent. So, I mean, I get that point, but think about China's system, whatever, but I still think it's superior to the Western model. Sure, not a Marxist-Leninist model, but yeah. See, here's the problem with that statement, but yeah. That's the problem. What you're encompassing and sweeping under the rug with the but yeah. So why are they calling themselves Marxist-Leninist? You got to like think a little bit more critically. You got to follow it out. Why are they calling themselves Marxist-Leninists? Where will this go? The question is not just in the here and now, is it better than the Western model? And better, what do you even mean by that? There's a lot of different metrics that you can measure an education system on. That's such sloppy thinking, and especially when it comes to Marxism-Leninism. Are you doing Marxism-Leninism or aren't you? And if you're not, what do we know about what happens? So that's what you're failing to consider by just, but yeah, Superior capitalism is worse, arguably, in that it still prolongs the death throes, yeah. All right, let's go into the next article, which is about their industrial policy. So this is from the morning.lk. AKD outlines the industrial policy of the NPP JVP. And so this is the industrial policy as of 2 years ago. So, take it with a certain grain of salt, but I think it's more or less in line with what was said in that other article. So, bullet point, claims party is not opposed to privatization, but that the state must not try to, quote, do it all either. So, the formatting in this article is terrible. It came out as just one big paragraph. So bear with me as we read through this. It's just kind of like a lot of big blobs of text. Even though Sri Lanka has paid great attention to privatizing loss-making public institutions with the hope that it would turn such institutions into profit-making ones, and so this is the whole like neoliberal implementation there, privatization does not necessarily result in economic or institutional growth, correct? While privatization is portrayed and viewed as the best path to achieve economic development, I mean, by people who will benefit from it, like the data doesn't support that at all. There are many other areas apart from privatization that the country should look into in order to make the public sector profitable, and efficient. At the same time, the government should strengthen and streamline the private sector by breaking monopolies. So we got some reactionary socialism, and supporting small and medium-scale enterprises, which will play an important role in developing the country's economy and the stability of the domestic market. These sentiments were expressed by National People's Power and JVP leader MP Anura Kumara Dissanakaye, speaking at a forum about privatization and the sale of state enterprises held last week, titled The Truth Behind Privatization. He pointed out several key steps that are necessary to strengthen the public and private institutions, especially with regard to the national economy. I think you'll find it's like fairly consistent with what was said in that 2023 interview. Stabilizing and strengthening domestic markets. During the speech, Dissanakaye underscored that unlike the private sector, the government has a social responsibility that needs to be fulfilled, which involves providing goods and services at a fair price, ensuring their quality, and ensuring their availability. To achieve that, he said, it is important to regulate certain sectors that can be regulated in order to reduce the pressure on the people by agencies such as the Consumer Affairs Authority and the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, noting that despite being considered an old system, certain sectors can actually thrive through the cooperative model. Dissanakaye added, quote, the cooperative society system is a good system and it is still widely used in the world. It is used as a tool to monitor the market's behavior too, what has been achieved through it. It has helped make interventions to control a fair price, good quality and availability, especially in paddy and rice markets. When it comes to our country's rice market, only 23% is owned by mainstream rice mill owners. The other 77% is owned by small and medium-scale rice mill owners. However, it has been possible for the 23% of the larger rice mill owners to completely dominate the paddy and rice market. That is because 77% of rice mill owners are not organized, they do not have brand names, stable quality, and an uninterrupted supply of products. However, the said 23% of rice mill owners have those qualities, and that has made it possible for them to create a rice monopoly. So what he's going to describe here is basically like helping to organize the small and medium ones into that. So continuing. Reminding that former Agriculture Minister Mahindananda, has said that the government was planning to set up 8 rice mills to change the status quo. Dissanakaye said that it would not be the approach his party or government under his party would choose. Quote, "We are not advocating for the government trying to control everything and trying to do it all. We will not do that. Instead, we will provide technology and capital for small and medium-scale entrepreneurs and organize them through some form of society or union to ensure that their products enter the market under one brand name and have the same quality. That could break this monopoly." Another approach he said is important, especially when it comes to breaking monopolies, is increasing competition. Taking the government's decision to impose import restrictions on tiles, he said that in a context where Sri Lanka's tile market is dominated by just 3 companies owned by 2 owners, import restrictions could create a tile monopoly in the country. He also noted that tile prices have already skyrocketed. Quote, "We will not allow monopolies to be created in the market. If we were to take that decision, we would have identified and invited several businessmen to enter this business. We would have taken measures to provide the capital they need through the banking system at a lower interest rate. In addition, in such a situation, we would provide the technical knowledge when necessary and would establish the confidence that their businesses would be supported. Only then would we stop importation," unquote. He stressed that his party or a government under his party would accept market behavior based on competition created by more manufacturers. Privatizing and restructuring the public sector. Dissanakaye went on to say that even though privatizing is often portrayed by various parties as a solution to save loss-making institutions, which the general public too believes due to the burden of the economy they're experiencing, it is not the best solution in many cases. He questioned the rationale behind selling to the private sector only selected public institutions, not inefficient or loss-making public institutions in general. He emphasized that the economy should be handled by the government in line with national economic strategies, and that one of the main obstacles hindering the country from reviving the public sector is unwarranted political interference. Dissanakaye pointed out several instances where relatives of a minister in charge of ports were appointed as chairman of Lanka Ports Authority, relatives of a minister in charge of petroleum oil were appointed as chairman of Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, and unqualified and connected persons were appointed to top posts of Sri Lankan airlines. He stressed that such appointments are usually made to public institutions pertaining to ports, petroleum, and Sri Lankan airlines, and that appointments made under political interference are generally made to institutions that have huge amounts of wealth. Quote, "In this context, first of all, institutions of economic strategic importance should be kept under the government and should not be politicized," he opined. Dissanakaye said that when he was serving as the Minister of Agriculture, he depoliticized public institutions that were under him, and that when it comes to top positions in those institutions, priority was given to expert and experienced professionals. He claimed that such steps have borne fruit. He further added that some institutions that suffer losses made profits when political interferences were prevented when appointing officials. Moreover, according to Dissanakaye, one of the main steps necessary to strengthen the public sector is eradicating corruption in public institutions. He opined that it is an achievable objective, as there is a large number of people who wish to support the country by doing their job properly. Unnecessary appointments, political appointments, and the recruitment of unsuitable persons, he said, are among the main factors that have nourished corruption, as well as a culture that supports corruption. With regard to public institutions that have more employees than they need, he explained, quote, "For example, the Ceylon Electricity Board has around 26,600 employees, which is an excessive number of employees. The CPC has around 2,300 employees. Every day, 5 buses travel from Matara to the Colombo port, carrying port employees, and this is because there was a port minister from Matara. Every day, 2 buses travel from Kalia Patia to Surabaya in Colombo, carrying employees, and this is because there was an education minister from Kalia Patia. Every day, 2 buses travel from Ratnapura to Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, and this is because there was a minister in charge of SLBFE who hailed from Ratnapura. We are told that this, the public sector, is a burden. Who created this burden, he questioned, adding that it is not at the top level, but at the bottom level of the public sector hierarchy that an excessive number of employees could be seen. They are political appointments. Appointing too many employees is not just a matter of salaries, it is also a matter of the culture created by too many appointments. Some employees, such as drivers, act as if they are more senior than their superior officers because the former's appointment was made by a minister. The whole system has been destroyed, and it is this culture that started the collapse of the public sector. Interesting theory. Dissanakaye further said that even if public institutions are sold, it may be difficult to save them under the existing political system, that Sri Lanka's public sector, which at one point was one of the most efficient public sectors in Asia, has now been completely destroyed by politics. So, back to the chat before we begin the third article. I wonder, what do they think about Tamils in the mid-2000s? That'll be the next article that we do. Let's privatize healthcare because the Minister of Health is a Nepo baby. So this one is regarding the relationship of the party to the Tamils. So this is from the Tamil Guardian, and the article is, Who is Anura Kumara Dissanakaye? Anura Kumara Dissanakaye, the Janatha Vikmuthi Peramuna, or JVP, and National People's Power candidate, initially entered Parliament via the Nationalist List in the 2000 parliamentary election via the Nationalist List. Whilst initially supportive of the then Kumaratunga administration, the JVP aligned with hardline Sinhala nationalists in opposition to the 2002 peace negotiations with LTTE. In 2004, the party rose to prominence by campaigning explicitly on an anti-ceasefire platform and forming an alliance known as the United People's Freedom Alliance, UPFA, with Mahinda Rajapaksa. The JVP has consistently stood opposed to international investigations into war crimes, the granting of devolution to Tamils, and backed the Sri Lankan military during its genocidal campaign. So they will then profile different features of the party and its history. So first is consistent opposition to the 13th Amendment. Whilst touring the Northeast this April, Dissanakaye stressed the need for political reform and tackling corruption, but emphasized that he did not come to offer implementation of the 13th Amendment. Quote, "We didn't come here to ask you for your vote. We didn't come here to tell you that we'd offer the 13th Amendment and you can vote for us in exchange. I didn't come here to offer you federalism so I can ask for your vote. I came here to discuss how we can help Sri Lanka emerge from its crisis," Dissanakaye told his predominantly Tamil audience. Despite his lack of enthusiasm toward the 13th Amendment, Dissanakaye would meet with members of the ITAK and claim that his party would implement the amendment. This stands in sharp contrast to his party's long-standing opposition to the Indo-Lanka Accord and to his own calls for the abolition of provincial councils. The Indo-Lanka Accord was signed in 1987 without any input from Tamil parties and established the 13th Amendment to Sri Lanka's constitution, which created the system of provincial councils, promising greater devolution of land and police powers to a merged Northeast. Quote, "As a political party, we strongly opposed the Indo-Lanka Accord decades ago and dedicated our initiatives to safeguarding Sri Lanka's sovereignty at the cost of many lives," said Vijitha Harath of the JVP earlier this year. Quote, "This stance has not changed and will not change," he told reporters in Colombo. Quote, "Throughout the country's history, we have consistently made decisions to safeguard our territorial integrity, and we stand by that commitment today and in the future. We give our assurance to the people of this country that these principles will not waver." The JVP staged 2 insurrections against the state in the early 1970s and the late 1980s. The latter of these was chiefly in response to the Indo-Lanka Accord and the 13th Amendment, which sought to devolve powers to Tamils in the Northeast. Tens of thousands were killed. Then leader Rohana Wajwira framed Tamil demands for self-determination as in hoc with U.S. imperialist interests in his 1986 book, Solutions for Tamil Elam Struggle. So I want to highlight here that it is a core Marxist-Leninist principle. Lenin wrote so many things about this, that the right of nations to self-determination is absolute up to and including secession. he wrote dozens of things about this thing. And so this is the thing of like everything is a color revolution. Everything is just, the U.S. wants it, whether it's like some kind of civil rights in Iran or whatever. It, that is not really conducive in the long term to, the global movement for democracy and socialism. But anyway, in 2015, then JVP Propaganda Secretary Herath told the island, quote, the JVP is against federalism. Whilst accepting that, quote, the grievances of the Tamil people should be redressed, he reiterated that federalism is not that solution. He also spoke out against the merging of the northern and eastern provinces as outlined by the Indo-Lanka Accord. Quote, it is the JVP that went before the courts and got an order to demerge the two provinces that had been arbitrarily merged after the Indo-Lanka Accord, he added, referring to when the JVP filed 3 separate petitions with the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka calling for the northeastern province to be demerged. The province was formally demerged into the northern and eastern provinces on 1 January 2007. Dissanakaye's manifesto stresses that they will ensure, quote, territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country without compromise. JVP party official Handanetti claimed that the party would continue to uphold the provincial council system, but that this was not a lasting solution. The JVP's checkered history with Sinhala nationalism and anti-Tamil sentiment has left many Tamils with reservations. In 2010, Dissanakaye himself said that the JVP will oppose if a new political constitution devolving powers to the northern and eastern provinces was to be created. Support for genocide. As part of the governing United People's Freedom Alliance coalition in 2004, the JVP fully endorsed the military solution, which would culminate in the Tamil genocide, and stood opposed to continued peace negotiations. A picture there from some of those protests. From its inception, the JVP was infused with Sinhala populism and found its support amongst the rural South. Founder Rohana Wajwira framed Tamil demands for self-determination as in hoc with U.S. imperialist interests, setting in place a long-standing history of racism toward the island's Elam Tamils. Though the JVP staged 2 violent insurrections against the Sri Lankan state that saw tens of thousands killed, it found no sympathy or solidarity for Elam Tamils and instead remained staunchly opposed to Tamil demands for autonomy. The party went on to breed some of the island's most fervent Sinhala racists. When a 2002 ceasefire agreement between the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam and the Sri Lankan government was initially signed, Dissanakaye was amongst the parliamentarians who fumed against it, telling Parliament that the LTTE had laid a foundation to establish a separate state in the island. He repeatedly protested the government, leading JVP rallies such as the 2003 5-day, 116-kilometer foot march from Kandy to Colombo, demonstrating against the deal. In 2004, the party's continued agitation and campaigning explicitly on an anti-ceasefire platform led it to it forming an alliance with the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and allowed Dissanakaye to take up a position as the Minister of Agriculture, Lands, and Irrigation. After the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami that year, which saw the deaths of over 35,000 people, 2/3 of which were reported to be from the Tamil Northeast, the JVP rejected the possibility of joint post-tsunami aid distribution. Instead, the Northeast saw vast sums of aid withheld by Colombo. Quote, we should spit on NGOs and stop them on our streets. Donor countries and their NGO agents are holding this country to ransom, telling the government to set up a joint tsunami relief mechanism with the LTTE. Wamal Wirawansa, the propaganda secretary of the JVP, told a Colombo audience in April 2005. The Sri Lankan government faced accusations of using the tsunami as a weapon of war and of denying aid to Tamils. In January 2005, the Sri Lankan government refused to permit the UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, to visit the Northeast. Dissanakaye and several other JVP parliamentarians would resign from the government a year later, displeased with the ongoing peace process. Instead, his party backed Mahinda Rajapaksa at the 2005 presidential polls, running on a platform specifically opposed to the ceasefire. In 2006, Dissanakaye was present as the JVP launched an organization known as the Joint Front to Protect the Nation to defeat the LTTE and to work for the abrogation of the ceasefire. As the Sri Lankan government launched a massive military offensive against the Tamil independence movement, the JVP would frequently rally in support of the state. Demonstrations would be held outside Western embassies and the United Nations office in Colombo, as the government repeatedly rejected international human rights monitors. Speaking before military officials in Ratnapura earlier this year, Lalkantha claimed that it was only the JVP, alongside the extremist monks in the JHU, that enabled the defeat of, quote, separatist terrorism. Quote, not the SLFP, not the UNP, not the SLPP, only the JVP and JHU said that we must finish this by war, and there is no other solution. That's the monks saying that. So, anyway, I mean, what they were saying before about being tainted by populism and racism. So you got like populism, racism, nationalism, and then of course, you know, the strategies are all involving capitalism and just kind of like social democratic regulations and reforms. Again, the term Marxism-Leninism has been debased to a point where it basically doesn't mean anything anymore. That's why we have to focus on the anti-revisionism, and you know why so many people now describe themselves as Marxist-Leninist Maoist in opposition to the capitalist turn in China and the everything that went on in the USSR involving the restoration of capitalism over several decades. So yeah, it's just at this point, I guess, like almost 5 years into doing this, I had no idea that things were this bad. But I mean, it makes sense with how the socialist camp collapsed and why it did, and that there were only really a few prominent anti-revisionists kind of describing all of this while it was happening. And that anti-revisionist current has always been there alongside the dominant revisionist current, restoring more of like a reformist or petty bourgeois line. And it's always been there, hasn't been able to really form a clear camp against this. I think that will be probably in the second 5 years of doing this channel, focusing a lot more on that and what needs to be done with that. Anyway, so I mean, it just seems to me like this is another example of that kind of extremely debased, why call yourself Marxist-Leninist at this point when you're just kind of more populist. Anyway, vowing to protect war criminals. The Sri Lankan military would go on to kill as many as 167,679 Tamil civilians in a campaign that has been dubbed a genocide. Food and medicine were embargoed, hospitals were repeatedly shelled, widespread sexual violence deployed, and surrendering Tamils executed. The events have been the subject of several UN reports and resolutions, including one that is currently being drafted at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva this month. The resolutions and Tamil victims have demanded an internationalized accountability process to hold perpetrators of war crimes accountable and finally deliver justice for the mass atrocities. Dissanakaye and the JVP have been firmly against such a move, with the JVP leader stating last month he, quote, will not seek to punish anyone accused of rights violations and war crimes, unquote. Quote, even the victims do not expect anyone to be punished, he claimed, despite Tamils repeatedly calling for an international accountability mechanism and for Sri Lanka to be taken to the International Criminal Court. At the same time, his party has openly embraced military officials implicated in war crimes, such as retired General Anura Jayatissa, reportedly entrusting him with their defense policy. Jayatissa was the commander of the 3rd Contingent to Haiti during a Sri Lankan peacekeeping operation that faced allegations of running a child sex trafficking ring during a UN peacekeeping operation from 2004 to 2007. Anti-India is the next section. The JVP has traditionally been thought to have stood on a, quote, anti-India platform, having staged the 1987 insurrection as the prospect of Tamil autonomy in the Northeast and the presence of the Indian peacekeeping force stirred up a wave of Sinhalese nationalism. The party had previously denounced Indian origin estate workers, Malayaga Tamils, as a, quote, fifth column instrument of Indian expansionism. For decades, it would rally against perceived Indian expansionism on the island, protesting against deals such as the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, a deal that would open up possibilities for greater trade and investment between the two countries. Dissanakaye shared those sentiments, telling Parliament in 2008, for example, that, quote, a secret plot has been hatched to hand over Kachathivu to India, and that it cannot be allowed to succeed at any cost. Though the issue of Kachathivu has been raised by New Delhi in recent months. India also invited Dissanakaye for an official tour of the country earlier this year. The visit was seen as a significant outreach by Delhi and marked a possible change of heart from the JVP's fiercely anti-India rhetoric that came to define its politics. Dissanakaye and a JVP delegation met with politicians, government officials, and members of the business community. Renegotiating the IMF bailout is the next section. After the economic crisis of 2022, under the tenure of then-President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Sri Lanka has been desperately dependent on a $3 billion IMF bailout package. The global body has repeatedly cautioned that Sri Lanka's path to debt sustainability remains knife-edged. The IMF's Communications Department Director, Julie Kozak, said last week that a planned program discussion will take place before the release of the next tranche of funding, which is estimated at about $350 million. But Dissanakaye has repeatedly said that his party would seek to renegotiate the terms of the agreement, something that the current government has warned against. Sri Lanka's State Finance Minister, Shihan Semasinghe, warned of an imminent economic collapse if Parliament is dissolved and a third review of the much-needed IMF loan is not completed. And I believe actually that Dissanakaye did dissolve the Parliament like yesterday. Let me look at that. Yeah, 2 days ago, Sri Lanka President dissolves Parliament to clear way for November 14 polls. So this is from Reuters, September 24. Sri Lanka's newly elected president has dissolved Parliament to clear the way for a snap general election in the debt-ridden country. And that will be held November 14. They keep describing him as Marxist-leaning. Where were we? Semasinghe stressed that abandoning the deal would jeopardize Sri Lanka's recovery. I guess the criticism being it wasn't actually recovering, potentially dragging the country into a crisis similar to the one it faced in 2022. Quote, "We must adhere to what we have agreed. We cannot unilaterally deviate from the program, as that would effectively mean walking out of the agreement." I think that is the idea. Semasinghe told reporters during an event in Colombo, quote, "If that happens, Sri Lanka could easily return to the conditions that we faced in 2022. Failure to comment on militarization is the next section. Dissanakaye's manifesto also fails to speak of the issues caused by militarization in the North and East. Instead, the manifesto attributes, quote, social inequalities in the distribution of land to privatization, citing that this has caused, quote, various political problems. It pledges that the NPP will develop a system of quasi-judicial institutions for fast and fair, that's a quote, resolution of land-related issues. Currently, there are various ongoing land disputes and the military occupation of the Northeast. So we'll maybe get into that manifesto in like the next stream or something. Next section, staunch Sinhala Buddhist nationalist. There's a picture there with a Buddhist monk. Despite presenting as a unifying candidate, Dissanakaye has consistently appealed to hardline Sinhala Buddhist nationalists. He recently addressed over 1,500 Buddhist monks in Maharagama, where he gave assurance that Article 9, giving foremost place to Buddhism, will not be touched. This is so Marxist-Leninist, I can't even... I mean, so anti-clericalism, even if you're not abolishing all religious institutions, you're supposed to be... You know, you can't use Leninism and then give preference to one religion or church. That goes completely against it. So the Leninist principle is anti-clerical and for making religion a, quote, truly private affair by not having the state have any funding or preference for any, religion. So, and then conducting materialist and atheist propaganda for its own part, the Marxist-Leninist state doing that. But anyway, we got this instead. So, nationalist populism and nothing really resembling Marxism-Leninism whatsoever. So that won't be touched, and that it has, quote, divine protection. Give me a fucking break. This nothing Marxist about this whatsoever. And that it's only a, quote, few extremist groups who are shouting against it. NPP member Nalinda Jayatissa, who addressed the Sangha and told the audience, quote, to rest assured, the NPP is committed to protecting Article 9 and to nurturing and nourishing Buddhism, as this is obviously a majority Sinhala Buddhist country, can't even believe what I'm reading, and Article 9 has never been a problem in this country, unquote. Speaking to a Tamil audience, Dissanakaye warned, quote, Jaffna must also be stakeholders of this victory. Do not be labeled as those who opposed this huge change. Wow. So threatening them. Be a stakeholder in this change. When the South is gearing up for change, if you're seen to oppose that change, what do you think the mindset of the South will be? Would you like it if Jaffna was identified as those who went against this change, those who opposed this change? Would you like it if the North was identified this way? So just sort of openly threatening. It is a sentiment that is widely shared in his party, with senior members such as KD Lalkantha openly associating with racist figures such as the Buddhist monk Nanasara of the Bodhu Bala Sena, or Buddhist Power Force. So anyway, that's the end of that article. Let's go back to the chat and we will close things out for today. All right. Tamils are still facing genocide. Just look at the white vans in Sri Lanka. It's like the helicopters in Chile during Pinochet. Tamil Elam are called the Tamils living in Sri Lanka, while Tamil Nadu are the ones living in South India. The province state is also named with that name. Just please don't look up who armed Sri Lanka during the genocide. Imagine all UN states that produce and sell some kind of weapons and subtract Turkey from that list. This sounds like Nazi party populism, ethno-nationalism, and preserving capitalism. Yeah, and, they'll do it under the banner of Marxism-Leninism. This party seems to be beyond saving. Israel have imitated the Rajapaksa government in the current genocide. They've also created safe corridors where Tamils will be safe and then bombed them. There are even speeches from Sri Lankan politicians from decades ago that current Israeli politicians are paraphrasing. Wow. Here are the speeches. Thank you for that link. Marxist-ish. Marxish. Let's go with Marxish. No, it's just, Nazi. But they also rack up a lot of debt because the North is militarized, and surprise, surprise, maintaining a military isn't cheap. And unless you're a developed country, you can't do this. Divine protection. Let me think about that. Marxish-Leninish. I'd be up for running with that. Hashtag Marxist. I can't even say. One of those days. Hashtag Marxish-Leninish. Marxish-Leninish. The old Marxist principle of the divine. Yeah. Good luck to all Sri Lankan comrades out there. Sri Lanka seems like choosing between Strasserites and Hitlerites. Thanks for the stream. You are welcome. This is worse than pure reformists. This is more like PSYOP socialism. Yeah, I mean, that's what I keep coming back to, is like, it definitely seems like you see this emerging in the online space as well, where there's this particular brand of this garbage, BRICS, multipolarity, like all those people. I mean, the multipolarity and BRICS people, there is this thing emerging that is this garbage version of, claiming to be Marxist in some way, but it's just like racist nationalist populism that has nothing to do with Marxism-Leninism. So, yeah. Well, we've caught up with the chat for today, and I think I'm actually going to leave it there. It's been a long time. People were asking about stream number 119, which I actually didn't get around to posting ever. It was like 4 hours long, and I just didn't have time to edit it. And I did put up a clip from it. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. I'll definitely post this whole stream. Really interested to hear more criticism of the platform that we read. But yeah, there is this thing emerging now, which is this kind of nationalism calling itself socialist. Wait, national socialism. That sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Anyway, it's nice to be streaming again. We definitely will do this again. Like I said, I wanted to balance out the audiobook to commentary ratio a little bit. Anyway, I'm going to go, but we'll see you all again soon, and I will edit and post this pretty soon.